So who believes that you are the perfect excuse machine? Not many. I'm willing to bet you believe you're not at all. But the odds are in my favor to win this bet, because unless you're aware of your self-talk, you're most likely doing it, and doing it without even knowing it. It's something we don't like to think we do, but it's just the nature of how our brains work. Which means most of us are doing it, especially now with so many first things going on ever, and still with so many unknown things to come. It just makes it that much easier to imagine some pretty scary scenarios. So again, what do you think the odds are that if you find yourself in a place where you're anxious or fearful, or just not happy, just not happy, or maybe feeling even stuck, that's because you're making up excuses in your head about the why. Last video we did was all about navigating through life, with Captain being the logical, conscious part of our mind, and then we have the crew, does most of the navigating, and our unconscious part of our mind. If we pick up where we left off, with our crew, the unconscious part of our mind, doing most of the navigating, which relies on all memories and past experiences, which mostly come before the age of 8. That is, if you haven't learned to upgrade your software yet. Yes, before the age of 8, before we had a firm understanding of what was realistic or what wasn't. So this leads the crew to come up with some skewed narratives, or worse, completely false narratives. The biggest roadblock I've seen with a lot of people I've worked with is the ability to be an excuse fabricating machine. Because once we believe we know what's up, we have our confirmation bias working overtime to skew everything we perceive in such a way to confirm our assumptions. We want to try to blame it on our anxiety, our depression, our lack of resources being inside and out. But if we take a realistic look at this, we can see that there have been people such as Oprah Winfrey or Michael Phelps who suffered from depression and anxiety that were still able to accomplish great things. If we're willing to still look a little bit further, we'll see people such as Warren Buffett. He did not have the resources and skills and still pulled off great things. This proves that our great excuses are just tricks we play with ourselves. What happens if we don't stop to see, we're living out the definition of insanity, where we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again, expecting different results. This keeps us stuck in fear. So how do we get past this way of living? With a little willingness to stop for a second and just feel what's going on. And then process our emotions and our thoughts and hold them up to the light of day. And see what's real, what does the evidence really show. When we do this, we could see there's more than just fearful memories. There's actually times that we were able to overcome adversity, because everybody alive at this moment has some battle scars, and this proves that we can and have survived and adapted. Now we're all our choice is the most healthiest way to go? Probably not. And that's why we continually need to move forward with a little bit of movement, some reflection, and then correction to adapt. On the other hand, not doing some self-reflection and correcting and adapting would be to try to stand still. Standing still by using our excuses. Excuses such as, I'll do it tomorrow, because tomorrow I'll have more time, more energy, more something. It's just some false reasons we're making up in our head of why we think tomorrow will be more doable or easier. Which we know now scientifically why we do it, but that's a whole nother video. Trying to stand still is just impossible, because everything's constantly changing. It's a killer to try to stand still and be stagnant. We are in a time and place in history where most of us can find great excuses of why we're not able to do what we want to do, but with just a little bit why we're not able to do what we want to do and to get to be a little comfortable in our skin. Forgot that part. A great way to approach this is in seeing life as a big experiment, not just reacting right away and labeling everything good or bad. We can learn to practice to see it as an experiment where we collect the data, then adjust and adapt, and then proceed to the next experiment. So instead of labeling everything good or bad, if we need to, we could call it healthy or unhealthy. Why would we just drop our hands and say it's out of our control? There's nothing that can be done here. Because if we do this, the way our captain works, it starts looking to confirm. I keep getting notifications, sorry about that, people. The way our captain works is we look for reasons to confirm the belief and choices, and just looks for evidence of why it's true. And we stop seeing possibilities and opportunities that could be right in front of our face. Throwing a little bit of challenge like we have now with all the unknown we find ourselves in today, and we become fearful and start opting to make excuses. But the reality is it's probably the perfect time to start doing this, because when things seem challenging, the willingness to implement a little energy, a little forward movement is when it's most rewarding. Not just because we can appreciate it that much more, it also seems that much easier when things clear up. I'm willing to say very bluntly, if you find yourself feeling not successful, not happy, not feeling a little bit of peace of mind, it has nothing to do with anything going on outside of you, and that it all comes down to your belief and your thinking, which leads to your perception of how you see things. I could say from my own personal experience, since I'm not just an owner but also a client, I had times where I had what seemed to be very successful things going on, and I ended up getting burnt out and unhappy because of the lack of balance that there was at that time. But times like today, where my life is simplified, a little grounded, with a little bit of happiness and feeling of fulfillment, so much easier. Some clients start by telling me just how hard it is to change, how hard it is to either diet, how hard to start exercising, hard to stop drinking, how hard it is to get to the next level in business, how hard it is to stay focused and be productive, hard to stop chasing that next bigger, better, more shiny thing. And they can do this with such a strong ability to come up with excuses why it's so hard that it's obvious, and you can tell they put a lot of practice into it. Saying how hard it is to keep the motivation going, how hard it is to keep discipline going, how hard it all is. And they come up with so many reasons, excuses, of how they tried so many different things in so many different ways that they believe it's just too hard and just impossible. But here's part of the catch. They really haven't executed all that much. And trust me, I get it. I have a lot of years of experience now, not just as a coach, but also being a coachee and being mentored, and being that person who really wanted to change from unhealthy habits. And I just thought I couldn't. I wanted to start eating right, get back into exercising, just wanted to make healthy choices for myself, and had that feeling that it was out of my control. So from going through that myself and coming out the other side, I know that being stuck and thinking and behaving with excuses is way, way harder. In fact, that's where true suffering comes in. It's way harder to keep acting the same way day in and day out, beating ourselves up emotionally, physically, mentally. Way harder to keep trying to find excuses and regurgitating them day in and day out. That's actually where the true torture happens, right? The times when I get stuck not believing in myself compared to the times where I can accept that life can be a little uncomfortable and just learn how to lean into it that much, just a little bit, is when we find fulfillment. And realizing that life might just not be all about finding the most convenient way of being and spending so much valuable time chasing some preconceived notion of comfortability and status. What if you could imagine seeing that it's actually your choices on how you approach your life and on how you spend your time. Your choice. One way being consistent struggle, or another way that might also have some hard times, but also has some rewards attached to it. Rewards in the form of finding meaningful and happiness, find some peace of mind now and then, and maybe even some joy. Yes, because the way our mind works, if left on autopilot, it mostly just looks out for danger. But with a little bit of effort, this will change. You just need to take some accountability and see what choices you're actually making. Is it time to summon up a little bit of courage and start choosing how we want to change? Because we know change will happen, just the way the life is. Do we choose not to choose? Which is choosing to just get blown around in the wind and possibly feel like a slave, lack of freedom without us saying what direction we want to travel in? Or do we choose to be a little inquisitive, maybe start a daily practice that reinforces that we are our own captain in charge of our own crew and can stay fully accountable? So I hope it possibly made you a little uncomfortable today speaking on this topic, because I do believe in being as loving and caring as possible to myself and others. Sometimes this means saying the hard truth, which is a little uncomfortable at times. Yes, I'm willing to listen, even empathize and validate feelings, because we know feelings aren't right or wrong. They're just feelings, right? But I wouldn't be a good coach or a good friend if, when really listening, I didn't acknowledge the fact that if you pulled that nail out of your forehead, it might really alleviate some pain. At least suffering anyway. Saying this is a little uncomfortable for me because sometimes I'm a little concerned that might come off like a little bit of a know-it-all, or maybe I think I'm better than. But I know I'm neither. I'm all about the beginner's mindset. The older I get, the more I realize that there's so much more that I don't know that I don't know. And definitely don't believe I'm either better or worse than anybody, because I think we all have our areas where we excel, then we have our other areas where we just crash. Plain and simple, this is what a good friend and coach does. They're willing to have the uncomfortable conversation with themselves and with others. So maybe it's time for you to become a little more clear and honest with yourself and acknowledge the fact that you, like everyone else, does sometimes unintentionally make self-harming excuses. Yes, maybe it's not our fault where we find ourselves now in these crazy circumstances, but we're totally responsible to help ourselves adapt and move on. I heard that, something I heard that changed my life was the phrase, are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? Not saying if you had some trauma in the past that we pretend like it never happened. We definitely, maybe it's time to start dealing with that. Or if you had some heartbreaking loss, there is time needed to process that. Even if something not that significant has happened, maybe you do need a little bit of a pity party. It can be beneficial. That said, how long do we stay in this phase? And when is it just making the excuses and continuing on day after day with excuses? That is the way it is because of our past or because of our future, because of lack of future, I should say. That's what we believe sometimes anyway. Is it time to stop? Come here, Tom. Is it time to stop distracting ourselves and sit still and take some self-inventory and accountability? Maybe it's time for us to step up and own our own part in why we are where we're not, where we are and where we're not, where we want to be, something like that. So I'll ask you again, is it time to stop making excuses over and over again and help yourself up to the possibility that some change in your belief on success are possible? If you heard me before, you know I don't see long-term goals as the be-all, end-all, that they're mostly for exploring our true values and being able to fully embrace them. What I'm really all about is the process, the plan that we set up on a daily basis. Small changes that might seem insignificant at first, changes that start up fairly quick, in a short amount of time. In fact, so small and insignificant that there's no doubt that they're possible for us to do. That's where it all starts. That's the win. It's in the small daily choices. Is it find time to fess up to yourself that if you're not feeling successful or happy, that it may have nothing to do with anybody else but you and the choices that you make. Now, if you're starting to feel a little overwhelmed because you think I'm just talking about all psychology or mindset stuff, I want to emphasize, I need to emphasize that's not at all what I'm talking about. Yeah, straight up mindset is changeable. Could be simple, but it's definitely not easy. What I'm talking about here is setting up and going into a process of flow of change in a behavioral way with our habits mostly. Neuroscience and AI have come so far in the last 5 years. So you're seeing this being implemented all around in sports, business, relationship strategies, all around the world. It's all about the process. If how we live day in and day out is fundamentally habitual, then it only makes sense that change can start with just one little tiny habit. It's all about focusing on the process and your daily rituals and processes. And this is the best and easiest way to do it. So can you see in your life today how it is all about habits? Now, do we see a bunch of unhealthy habits? Or can you see some unhealthy, productive habits? Okay, guys, again, I hope I moved you into a little bit of uncomfortability and maybe some willingness to reflect on your own daily behavior and into the possibility of adapting a tiny habit that can make all the difference. If that's a maybe, but you still feel uncertain, I still do a limited number of strategy calls that you could call. We could do it. Strategy calls free of charge. For myself and for most people, just having another person perspective shined on us is tremendously helpful. We all have blind spots, and sometimes they're really big, especially when we try to just practice keeping our heads down and grinding away. If you like now, I do have a link set up for strategy call through Calendar. It's cool. You could do it whenever, whatever time is most convenient for you. Again, no charge. And who knows, maybe this is your shift in your perspective that I hoped for, and I can guarantee you'll find value in our call, because just having somebody detached, objective outlook, looking with you where you are and where you want to go. And if for some reason not a good fit, we'll find resources that you need, so it's all good. Let's make sure you're not just having a bunch of blind spots and making a bunch of excuses. Maybe it's time to actually take a little bit of action for yourself today. Okay, that's it. And if you haven't told yourself today, I will tell you, I love you and peace out. And to the believers who think that they may be the perfect excuse machine. Okay, everybody, have a good night. One more time.